With Bob, we can
Okay,
start.
okay. हॅलो एव्हरीवन. माझं नाव रोहित सरदेसाई आणि आज आपण क्युबरनेटिसवर एक इंट्रोडक्टरी सेशन घेणार आहोत. सो बिफोर स्टार्टिंग विथ कुबरनेटिस, there are a few concepts that we need to understand. I hope like you have heard about Docker and virtual machines and containers, right? So Kubernetes basically is a platform which allows us to manage containers. So just we will see what is a container, and then we will switch on to what is Kubernetes and how it works. So initially, like many years back, we were working on like we still work on virtual machines, right? So virtual machines is nothing but like you have existing hardware, right? And then on top of the hardware, you have an operating system. आणि त्याच्यावर आपलं एक हायपरवायझर असतं जसं VMwareचं ESXi सर्व्हर असतो राईट अँड यू कॅन बेसिकली प्रोव्हिजन virtual machines which share the host OS resources like hardware असतं storage network आणि CPU RAM right that is all provided by the host operating system and the hypervisor जे असतो that basically manages all these resources and shares them across the applications right so each if you look at the virtual machine when you spin each application that you spin it has to have its own guest operating system right and then you have libraries which are required for an application to run so this makes the virtual machine very bulky right GBs मध्ये जाते त्याची साईज and it is not very portable also म्हणजे एका सिस्टम वरून दुसऱ्या सिस्टमवर तुम्हाला रन करायचं असेल across hypervisor रन करायचं असेल so it is not possible to portable to achieve this portability. Then you have bare metal machines also where you don't have the host operating system right you directly load the guest operating system on top of the underlying hardware. This basically is feasible like in situations where you are totally off premise like तुमच्या if you don't want to go to public cloud or use shared infrastructure and you want to have like bare metal machines without a overhead of the host operating system this is another option where you can deploy your applications using bare metal machines. So hypervisor still is an overhead here and the third transformation that happened over the years was from virtual machines to bare metal machines. Finally, there came a concept of containers. So this was the concept of containers is very old, right? Linux container technology is very old, but uh, uh, with the upcoming versions of Docker, right? Docker was a container engine which really made the concept of containers known to everyone. So what is a container? Basically, container is nothing but it is a process. It is a Linux process, right? And it is basically allowing you to run your application with a minimal guest OS. Okay, so if you see over here in this diagram, the reductions are happening at the layer of the hypervisor. There is no need for a hypervisor to run here, which makes the container image very lightweight. It is like in MBs. So on top of that, you have a container engine so instead of the hypervisor managing your application's lifecycle and sharing of resources, right? There is a container engine which basically sits on top of the host operating system, right? And then it basically translates all the calls that you need for various resources via the application through the libs, through the minimal guest OS. So you could basically have like a Windows machine. On top of that, you could basically run an Ubuntu um, BusyBox basically OS, and on top of that you can run your application. So imagine you are having a Windows operating system. On top of that you are running, you know, um, uh, an Ubuntu application or basically an application running on top of Ubuntu, or you could have RHEL or any other operating systems. So the minimal guest OS is very important here. You're not packaging the entire Ubuntu operating system which is in GBs, but a minimal or only the required libraries of the operating system for your application can be bundled up as a minimal guest OS and you can still use it. So in this way, the size of your image, like a VM image, is much bigger because you see there is a host operating system and this layer adds a lot of overhead and it basically also takes a lot of time to start and stop virtual machines right? And and the overhead of translating the calls from the application layer via the hypervisor to the host operating systems and to the hardware and getting all the way back, the latency involved here is also more. So in case of containers, this overhead is reduced, right? The time to start a container is in almost milliseconds or microseconds. Depends on your application. What is your application, and what uh, what are the things that you do at startup, right? What are the libraries you need and all, and the size also is like less because you are using a minimal guest operating system. So container, when you now think about a container, right, you will think about security, because in case of hypervisor, there is a this layer provides you security or isolation of resources at the hardware level. So this is a strong way of isolating resources, right? Because the hypervisor now strictly basically creates separate machines altogether, separate virtual machines for each of the applications. So a user who is basically using an application A cannot basically share or look at any of the resources that are there in application B. So they are two separate uh, applications which are separated by hardware isolation. So isolation is very important because you don't want your content to be looked upon by any other user, right? That is like a security breach. So how does it help with containers, right? Because in containers, if you see here, there is a hypervisor is missing. So how will you achieve this isolation? So isolation can be of two types: hardware isolation and then software isolation. The software isolation basically can be achieved using Linux C groups and namespaces. So I will not go into depth, but I just wanted to give you an overview that we can basically use something called C groups and namespaces to separate out the processes. So application A is running its in its own container, application B is running in its own container, and because they are still sharing the same host OS, right? There is a possibility that they could probably hack into each other's resources, right? And basically one guy can look into the file system of another container. The way to basically restrict that is using C groups and namespaces. So so the Linux or any operating system provides you basically these kind of constructs. In Linux, it is using C groups and namespaces. So C groups allows you to basically restrict how much CPU that you want to use, how much RAM you want to use, right? How much disk IO you want to perform. And namespaces, Linux namespaces, which are of different types, right? There is a mount namespace, there is a network namespace. So using Linux namespaces, you can basically isolate, saying that okay, out of this whole global network namespace, um, a part of this namespace is allocated or assigned to container A. So container A cannot be assigned any IPs from the other network namespace, or it cannot share the network of container B. Similarly, container B is restricted to use any of the network resources from container A. So if you see here, isolation is there at the software level, but still there are chances, right, that you could still hack into the other guy's resources. So there is a lot of research going on this area, that how do you improve upon this, right? So there are solutions which are like in between virtual machines and containers. So they are called like lightweight virtual machines or KVMs kind of thing, right? So I'm not going to go into all those details. So now that we know what is a container, right? A container is a lightweight virtual machine, you can say, which is much smaller in size. It starts up or boots up very fast, and it allows you to isolate your resources by using software isolation. And you can run your applications in containers. So instead of spinning up virtual machines, like say if you have 1,000 applications, you would need 1,000 virtual machines, and then managing them in a data center would be much more costlier, right? Because you need more resources, more administration, and then more overhead in terms of the API calls or the latency, right? If you have containers, you could have millions of containers which are running either on virtual machines or bare metal machines, but the overhead involved is still there, because you still need to manage these containers. Because if a container goes down, like if you have like say an e-commerce application which is running in a container, right? Now you want to basically say that my e-commerce application should be always on, right? But if for some reason your application crashes, then how do you basically bring it back up again, right? And this is like, we are not talking only about one container. Imagine there are data centers spread across clusters, across regions, right? And you basically need to now monitor each and every container that is running in each and every cluster, and then check the health of each container, and then monitor and then bring it back up again. This is going to be very, very tedious, right? So this is where container orchestration platforms or container management platforms come into picture. Now you imagine you have millions of containers, and there are different types of containers. Some containers run database applications, some containers run UI applications, right? Some run middleware applications like Kafka or Elasticsearch or different types of applications. And you need to basically have always, like, say, X copies of my container up and always running at this point in time. Or like, say, if there is a Flipkart, some sale is going on, right? Some sale is there, like on Independence Day or any other offers that are going on, right? At that point in time, you will obviously have a larger volume of requests coming into your application. So there will be peaks that you will observe at these point in times, and there will be not so much load or not so much peak at other points in time of your application lifecycle. So how do you basically scale up or scale down your application? Basically, I will say that, okay, whenever there is, like, say, Independence Day sale going on, I want 2x number of copies of my container or application always up. But on other times, I want only X number of applications. So you have to basically now automatically scale up or scale down based on the demand, right? So all these kind of things, right? It is tedious to do manually. That's where platform applications like Kubernetes come into picture. So any questions we can take actually right now, because then it will be helpful to go ahead. So any questions you have? I don't see anything in the chat. So Kapil, we can go ahead, right? Then we can maybe take all the questions at the end. Yeah, Docker is actually not a container. So if you see over here, right, container engine. So container engine basically is kind of a layer which sits on top of the host OS, and its job is to basically manage all applications or containers. So Docker is a container engine. Okay. So yeah, AWS EC2 work as a container or VM. So AWS EC2 provides you VMs, not containers. For if you want to have containers, right, then there is AWS EKS service, Kubernetes service, which provides you to run your applications in containers. Containers are used to run only services. So containers can be used to run anything. Basically, if you have like a shell script, for example, or if you have a cron job that you want to run, if you want to back up a database, if you want to, like, it can be anything. It can be right from the UI to the middleware to the backend. It is just a Linux process, or basically an operating system process, right? Which basically has the logic that you want to execute. So it can be anything, right? So scale up and scale down automatically. What different in cloud and Kubernetes? Yeah. So Kubernetes basically provides you to scale up and scale down your containers, and the automatic scaling is a separate topic actually. So if you have like Google Cloud or AWS, right? AWS has that elastic load balancer, right? Which allows you to define scaling groups. So those are for basically scaling up and down your nodes, right? Your hardware resources or your VMs. This scale up and scale down is for your applications. Okay, application number you want to increase or decrease, that can be done using your Kubernetes platform. So scaling up and scaling down of your hardware, basically the nodes, the machines which run your containers, can be managed by your cloud providers. Like it can be GCP or AWS or any other cloud provider, right? They have their own auto scaling mechanisms for scaling of resources. Yeah, I think, yeah, you're correct. Docker is a container engine which can be used to run multiple images and containers. Correct. Yeah, that's correct. So when should we go for Kubernetes? Yeah, this is a good question. Not everything can be containerized, right? So it is like slowly and steadily the adoption of containers is increasing. And if you see, slowly and slowly people are getting more and more used to or getting reliable on containers, because containers give you the speed to scale up and scale down. And more so, like with more and more security hardening research going on in containers, it allows you to basically trust that your application will run fine. So if you have a large scale application which is like uh, 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 like an AWS e-commerce platform, or any other large scale application, and you want to handle like say billions of requests per day, and you don't want to bother about administering your applications manually, then it makes sense to use a platform like Kubernetes. And if you already have like say a monolith application, or you have already some microservices which are running on VM infrastructure, right, and you want to migrate to Kubernetes, so that journey has to be basically analyzed first. What all things can be containerized, what all things cannot be containerized, right? And what would you achieve after decoupling these things? So I think these kind of questions we can discuss at the end. So right now we will just go ahead with our session. I think there are more and more questions coming. So for those who have like who are very new to Kubernetes, Kubernetes is, as I told, a container orchestration platform or a management platform for managing your resources. So this term, basically this open source project came from Google, and they had a system called Borg, right? And in Google, they had like say these thousands of machines in a data center, and there are thousands of data centers, and they wanted a effective way of basically managing their applications. So from Borg, they took the learnings and they open sourced this project. I think in 2014 or something. Yeah, that's when basically this project had started. And slowly and steadily it became a very popular open source project. It is like the first project which got into the CNCF, Cloud Native Computing Foundation. And the meaning of Kubernetes is like a helpsman. So it basically guides the ship, right? So in case of containers, it is a platform which is responsible for managing your containers. So it is a container orchestrator or a cluster manager. So what does Kubernetes do, right? It places containers on nodes. So basically, if you have some applications and you have your nodes, so nodes can be virtual machines or bare metal machines. Uh, so it allows you to run your containers on nodes, and it recovers automatically from failure. So as I told, right, if your database application is down, you can you can define health checks, and Kubernetes can know that your database application has gone down in some node, in some cluster, in some region, and it automatically will bring another copy of the database application up. So that's how it will recover automatically from failure. And it provides you a lot of additional things which are important for observability, like how do you monitor your application, how is your application doing, how much resources it is consuming, right? And how many requests per day is it able to handle, how do I need to scale it up or scale it down, those kind of thing. It provides you metrics, logging, health checking, and then enables containers to find each other, which means that if I have a UI front end pod, and it has to talk to a REST backend, these two uh, these two containers can basically run um, on separate machines. And then the UI pod, basically the UI application needs to find a way to communicate with the backend. So Kubernetes provides you networking constructs to allow this communication. So this is what basically Kubernetes allows you to do. And yeah, it came from Google, and then they open sourced it, and now it is one of the top GitHub projects. This is the link, and it is very active. And there are, I think this slide is outdated. There are more contributors now, and it is written in Golang. and hosted by the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. So now I'll switch to this another slide deck where they have already explained the different stuff. So as I said, Kubernetes, what are the basic features, right? So if you have like say an application like Flipkart or any other e-commerce application or any application that you want to basically containerize. So you can say that, okay, start 5 copies of my application. Okay. And if you want to load balance between these containers, you can place a load balancer which will do a round robin or any other way of routing the request from the end user to these containers. Then you can say basically it's Black Friday or Christmas, so there are traffic spikes, right? You are expecting an increase in the load. Now I want to grow my cluster, so I want to add new containers, more copies of my applications to be up. So Kubernetes will do that for you. Okay, now I have a new release. So you are developing 0.1 version of your app, right? And after maybe a couple of weeks or maybe a month, you want to upgrade to 0.2 version, right? Without the end user being affected. How do I do that, right? I don't want my end user to face downtime, and I don't want him to get 500 HTTP requests or 404 or any other kind of requests. I want all his requests to be served usually, and I want to upgrade without any hiccups, right? So how do I do that? So upgrades are also possible. So I can replace my containers with new Docker images. So with a new version. So basically your new application with a new version will be available at some Docker repository or Quay repository, and you will tell Kubernetes that, okay, my new version of application is out, please upgrade. So it will do a rolling upgrade, which means that it will keep some copies of your old application up and running, and it will upgrade or bring up new images and also keep some of the old images running so that the end user is not affected. So this is what is meant by keep processing requests during the upgrade. Update my containers one at a time. So if there are 5 copies of my application, okay, always upgrade one app at a time. So first I upgrade the first application to a new version. The rest 4 are still serving with the old version, right? So the end user requests are honored, they are not dishonored, but at the same time I'm upgrading my applications to a newer version. Then I go to the second application, I bring it down, I update the image, I bring it back up, I go to the third one, take it down, update the image, bring it up. So this, in this way, Kubernetes provides you to upgrade your applications as well. So there are a lot of advanced features of Kubernetes. One of them was auto scaling, which also works with the cloud provider auto scaling mechanisms. Blue green deployment, canary deployment. So I'll not go through all these things because these are like separate topics. So you might be aware of, like, you might have come across terms like clusters, right? So clusters, what are clusters? Clusters are like a collection of nodes. There may be thousands of nodes in the cluster, there could be hundreds of nodes, right? So Kubernetes cluster is also not very different. It is a cluster of nodes, right? And a node is either a bare metal machine or a virtual machine. So what does a user or a developer do with Kubernetes, right? So on the right hand side, if you see, there are nodes. These are like virtual machines or bare metal machines, right? And on the left hand side, there is a Kubernetes developer who develops applications on top of Kubernetes. So it and that specification is specified in the form of a YAML file. Like it is similar to a JSON description. So you can define metadata about your application. Where is your Docker image? How much CPU you need? How much memory you need? How much how much storage do you need, right? And how do you start your application? What is the startup script? Like a similar to a Docker file, but it is much more than a Docker file. And you can tell how many copies of your application you want to keep running. Like say I will say that, okay, for my web server I want 2 copies of this to be always up and running. So you give this specification to Kubernetes. The Kubernetes control plane will take the specification and it will try to find out VMs or bare metal machines where there are enough resources to run this application. Okay, so if you say I want if I want two copies, and if there are four nodes, out of these, say these two nodes are having sufficient resources like sufficient CPU and RAM, and whatever you have requested is available, it will schedule basically this application onto these nodes. And there are agents running on this node like called kubelets, which will which will ensure that whatever applications are scheduled onto these nodes are brought up and running. So this is like a very high level overview. Within these, there are many components which make this possible. Within these nodes, there are many agents and many processes running that are responsible for managing the life cycle of your container, which also includes container engines like Docker or any other CRI compliant runtimes. So Kubernetes architecture at a very high level is there is a control plane which we like call as a master plane, right? So master nodes basically control or keep an they have a view of all the worker nodes. Worker nodes are the nodes where your applications are deployed, right? Your applications are not deployed on the control plane. The applications come basically the request comes from the user to the control plane. The control plane decides where to put this application, on which worker node to put based on the requirements, and the worker nodes run the applications. So it is like a master and a worker kind of an architecture, and they are loosely coupled and they talk to each other via gRPC mechanisms. So going a little bit deeper into the architecture, on the control plane side, there are a couple of processes which run, and on the worker nodes, there are a couple of processes which run, right? Which makes all these things possible. So out of those, API server is basically a, HTTP based server, which allows you to basically uh, invoke APIs. So it provides you APIs to create these applications or to basically delete applications. So you can think like if you have seen REST-based HTTP endpoints, right? API server provides you these kind of endpoints. So so these so the kubelet on the worker node side talks to the control plane via the API server. So there is no other way communication happens between the control plane and the worker nodes. It happens only via the API server. And whatever requests come in from the end user, they go via the API server. So API server is a central point of contact or the coordinator, you can say, which coordinates the requests from the worker nodes and from the end user. There is a scheduler which basically plays a part of like scheduling applications coming from the end user onto worker nodes. As we discussed, right, there might be resource requirements of CPU, memory, storage. So the scheduler basically knows or decides which worker node to put your application onto. Controller manager is a component which basically consists of a lot of controllers. So as we said, right, we wanted like say 5 replicas of your application to be always up and running. So the so the request comes in and the controller manager basically sees that okay, this guy needs 5 copies. So it records that thing in its database, which is etcd here, and then 5 separate applications are deployed on 5 separate nodes. And if any of the application goes down, right, the kubelet responds back with the status saying that okay, this application has gone down on worker node A. It comes back to the API server and it registers it in etcd, which is the storage. The controller manager looks at this storage and sees that okay, I was requested for 5 copies, but I see that okay, out of 5 only 4 are running, one is down. So I will run a something called reconciliation loop, and this reconciliation loop tries to match the desired state with the tries to match the actual state with the desired state. So the desired state was 5 replicas or 5 copies, and the actual state was 4, right? So it tries to match the actual to 5. So it will basically create one more application. It will basically schedule a request for one more application to be up, which will again go to the scheduler. Scheduler will again find another worker node. It may not be the same node on which the application was earlier running. It may be some other node, but that application copy will come up again. So this is how this whole reconciliation loop runs, and Kubernetes operates on these principles, saying that um, you basically say that I want X copies of my application to be always up and running. You don't tell Kubernetes where to place the copies and how to observe them and all, right? Kubernetes will do that for you. You just have to say that, okay, how many copies you need, and and then the Kubernetes control plane runs this reconciliation loop. So this reconciliation loop keeps on running every X seconds. The controllers always keep on checking the state in etcd and any request that come in via the API server via down events from the kubelet, and they will keep on adjusting the actual state to match the desired state. etcd is a distributed key value storage, right? It is used for storing configuration related data. So if you know in Linux there is /etc, right, which is configuration, which is the place where you store configuration. So etcd is distributed configuration. So etcd basically is a storage for the control plane where it stores all the information about which applications got deployed onto which nodes, right? And which uh, which applications are not basically assigned to any worker nodes, which means they are in pending state. So all these things are recorded in etcd, and the API server basically watches etcd for any changes and then communicates either with the controller manager scheduler or with the kubelet and makes sure that your application is always up and running. On the worker node side, there are a uh, bunch of components. First is the kubelet. So this kubelet is nothing but an agent. It is a process that runs on each worker node and it communicates with the control plane via the API server, and it always basically ensures that whatever application is running on this particular node, right, that is always up. If it is down, it will communicate it to the API server, right, and the API server will respond back um, with the either to restart that application or kill that application and bring it up on another node. So all that management is done by kubelet. So kubelet is the central guy which talks to the API server and makes this communication possible. Other than that, there is a container runtime, right? So this container runtime is the container engine that we talked about, which is responsible for managing the life cycle of your applications. So imagine there are containers which are running here, right? And there is a container runtime. So this could be Docker or any other container runtime. And kubelet basically translates the calls from the Kubernetes metadata into into the commands which are native to the container runtime. So for Docker, it is like Docker run command. For any other runtime, it would be the runtime specific command. So there is a interface here in between the kubelet and the container runtime, which is called CRIO, Container Runtime Initiative. So CRIO. So that CRI specification defines what should be the um, what should be the actions possible from a container runtime perspective. So starting a container, stopping a container, doing an inspect on the container, right? Restarting the container, pulling the Docker image. All these are operations that are implemented by container runtime, and the CRI specification, the container runtime interface specification, sits in between the kubelet and the CRI and the container runtime. So if you want to have an additional container runtime plugged in, that has to implement the CRI specification. Okay, and it has to basically then kubelet has to talk to the runtime and bring up the containers. In addition to these two components, there is a network proxy which is called a kubelet. The kube proxy. So this kube proxy is responsible for basically managing your services. So this I will talk about later because it is like a separate topic which we need to cover. So imagine that there are uh, many containers which are running and they are exposed as like services, and you want to basically do a load balancing between services. So for that purpose, you have a service kube proxy which is installed on every worker node. So this is another architecture diagram which explains same thing which I explained to you, right? So on the master side, there is etcd, controller manager, API server, scheduler, right? So the API server exposes REST APIs. It persists all the metadata into etcd, which is a key value store. On the left hand side, there are controller managers, which are running reconciliation loops to match the desired state to the actual state. And there are schedulers which are responsible for binding pods. So we will come to what are pods. Bind pods or applications to nodes. So scheduler has its own responsibility of scheduling pods to nodes. API server is a central point of contact, and there are other components which do their jobs. On the node side, there is an operating system on every node. On top of that, a container runtime. On top of that, kubelet and additional networking plugins which allow you to do networking between the nodes. Like how to basically achieve communication between containers running across nodes. So if there are applications running here and here and they want to talk to each other, they can talk via their overlay network or an underlay network, right? So those are provided by container networking technologies, which are implemented by the CNI plugins, right? So that is again a separate thing. Calico, Flannel are various networking plugins which allow you to build an overlay network and and allows containers to talk to each other. So this is the same architecture, a little bit like explained in a top-down fashion. So if you see here, kubelet talks to the container runtime. Container runtime basically delegates call to the OS to create the necessary C groups and namespaces for the container to run, right? And kubelet also talks to the networking layer to establish subnets and IP ranges and all that stuff. And each kubelet talks to the API server to report the state of the containers running on the node. So yeah, this we have already gone through controller plane, the worker node. So container runtimes, so Rocket is not supported now. It was deprecated, but there are other runtimes it supports. Container D is a very popular open source project which is now supported as a maybe it is going to be the default container runtime for Kubernetes. Yeah, kubeproxy I said for load balancing the traffic between the applications. We will look at these concepts in the next slides. So what do you mean by running a Kubernetes application, right? So the user submits a YAML file, right? A YAML file basically specifies which Docker image you want to pull and run, right? And that is given to the Kubernetes control plane, right? The Kubernetes control plane will basically schedule this application based on the number of replicas or copies onto different worker nodes, right? So if the application gets deployed on only these three nodes, right? Like there are three copies of your application you want to run, and the container runtime will basically look at your specification and try to pull the Docker image or any container image from the Docker registry or any other container registry where your Docker image is sitting. So it will basically pull this image and it pulls the image over here, and then and the container runtime basically starts this container. So now your application is running as a container on these three nodes, right? So how do you work with the cluster? So as I said, API server provides REST-based HTTP endpoints, right? And it allows you to communicate with this Kubernetes cluster via a utility called kubectl. So it is basically a CLI utility which allows you to create applications, delete applications, and create different type of resources in Kubernetes via REST commands. So this is an example of kubectl version. And if you want to run a container in a pod, so we have not yet considered what is a like we have not yet discussed what is a pod. So I'll come to this thing later. So this is the same thing. It pulls the application. I think yeah, I'll come to this first concept of pod. So So imagine like you have a web server which is running, and yeah, this example. So imagine like you have a web server which is serving requests to end users, right? It is like a some blog website that you have exposed, right? And consumers are hitting your blog website, and there is basically a separate process which pulls files from a CDN website or a CDN site, and pulls like HTML pages or any other pages that you want to be displayed in your website, images, any content, right? That is there over here. This guy is responsible for pulling that images and storing it in a storage, like on disk, for example. And this guy, web server, responsibility is to load this content like HTML or static content and display it to consumers. So there is a separate process which has to run to display the content. There is a separate process which has to run to download the images and or download the content and store it. And both of these processes depend on or use a shared storage, which is a volume, and all the data is stored over here. So if you have applications like these, right, and you know that if you run them as separate applications in separate containers, they will have to basically somehow have to share this data, right? So instead of having this data either duplicated or shared via RPC mechanisms or NFS based file systems, would it make sense to package these two processes together inside a single logical application and run together? So whenever these two guys run, they run together. They come up as processes, individual processes, but they always come up together. They always go down together, and they always share a common storage. So if you have such kind of scenarios, right, and you wish to always couple them together, then there is a concept of pod which comes into picture. So pod is nothing but a collection of containers, right, which basically are logically tied up to each other, and they talk to each other via volumes or any other mechanism. So the advantage of using a pod is they can communicate to each other using localhost itself. They don't have to use any container networking technologies or overlay networks to talk to each other. They can talk via localhost, which makes communication easier and faster. And what it means to us is like we don't have the overhead of separate managing these containers separately. So this is where a concept of a pod comes into picture. So always try to group containers into pods if they are logically related, and even if you want to tightly couple them, it doesn't make much difference. It is easier to manage for you. But if there are still scenarios that you want to have them separately, it is still possible. Then you can run just one file, this process in a separate pod, and then this process in a separate pod, and then have a shared storage to communicate between them. So this is like a design choice or a design decision that you need to take while you design your applications, whether you want to package them as separate pods, or you could still couple them into a single pod. So this concept is very important of a pod, because based on this, the entire future slides are based on. So if you see here, there are three nodes, right, and there are different pods running on each of these nodes, and some pods have two containers, some pods have only one container, right? So now imagine this container, this pod goes down. For example, the container within this pod crashes, right? Or this node itself goes down because of some reason. Then what happens? Then this pod C has to come up somewhere, right? This application has to be brought up somewhere. So then Kubernetes scheduler and the controller loops will identify that and put that pod and ensure that pod is running on node 3, because there are resources available on node 3, for example. This kind of thing is like not encouraged. A pod spanning across nodes with processes running across nodes, right? This is not encouraged. And the way pods communicate, as I said, via um, overlay networks, right? So you can have uh, Flannel, Calico, or any other overlay networking technologies to basically assign IPs to pods, right? So each pod will be given an IP, and then uh, basically they can talk to each other across nodes via the IPs. Across, if they're in a single node, they can still talk to each other via local host. But if they're across nodes, the overlay network translates the calls between uh, uh, as the packets go across the nodes, right? The overlay network comes into picture and it will translate it, and it will make sure that your packets reach the desired destination on the desired node. So these are all like vast topics in themselves. My idea was here to just give you an overview, and we can have separate sessions on each of these topics, and we could also have volunteers who have worked in these areas and would like to, share their knowledge.
Yeah, Rohit, sorry to interrupt. I mean, that's Kaustav, so that's a good thought, like, because each of these things are individual topics, right?
Yes.
So we could have multiple sessions in that way. I mean, considering the time constraints and everything what we have, right?
Yeah, yeah, correct.
Yep.
Yeah. So this is basically you saw in the previous slides there was a YAML file, right, where which the user submits. So this is an example of a YAML file for a pod. So what it says is everything in Kubernetes is a resource. Resource can be of different types. One of them is a pod. There could be deployments, replica sets, endpoints, services, different types of resources are there. And you can basically define what is the kind of resource you want to create, and you can specify some metadata about the pod, like what is the name of the resource. And this is a specification. Specification means what are the containers you want to run in this pod. So like I want to run an Nginx web server, and I want to run it on port 8080, which talks via protocol TCP. So you can define your YAML file in this format and give it to kubectl command. You can say kubectl create and this YAML file. It will push it to the control plane. It will go to the scheduler. Scheduler will check which worker node is available. It will tell that worker node to pull this application on that node and bring up the Nginx web server, and your web server will be up and running, right? Labels are basically metadata. So if imagine you have so many pods running, right? And you basically will have a strategy to move your applications from like um, staging test to stage to production, these kind of levels you might have, right? So for logically identifying or labeling these applications, you could basically have you know uh, these tags or labels associated with each of your pods, saying that okay, if this pod basically has a label prod, which means this pod is eligible for running in production, right? But there are some pods which are not eligible for running in production systems. So you will label them using some labels like test. And this app's name is A, this app's name is B, right? So these are basically pods which can run on different nodes in different clusters. So you could have a production cluster, you could have a test cluster, you could have a staging cluster, right? And depending on the maturity of your application and how much hardened it is, you can move it across clusters by labeling it appropriately. So if you change this label from test to production, right, this pod is now you are promoting it to be run in production. So it can basically be scheduled onto the production cluster and start serving end customers. So think of labels like managing your pods or applications just by providing some tags, right? Basically in Twitter or LinkedIn, you have hashtags, right? Similar to that, you can have labels for your pods. So you can basically classify them like this. Okay, which are the pods which are running in production and of label A? Like what are the A pods running in production? So pods A and H run in production. What are the B pods that run in production? So there's a pod D which is running in production of type B. So this is how basically you can easily manage your pods across different stages of your pipeline. Namespaces is a concept basically to isolate at the cluster level. So if you have different kinds of namespaces, like you have a dev namespace, you have a test namespace, right? So you basically namespace is another resource in Kubernetes. So its YAML file looks like this kind namespace, and you can say kubectl create namespace. So namespace is like for basically logically grouping your applications. So if if you don't want your applications in your dev namespace to be shared or coupled with applications in test namespace, you could have a logical separation between them. So separates the resources into different non-overlapping groups. And then you can define permissions on namespaces, like who all can create or delete resources or get resources, or those kind of permissions you can define on namespace. So if there is a QA person and he is trying to access an application in the dev namespace, right? And if you say that he has only read only permission, he will still be able to read the application, but he will not be able to delete or update or modify the application in the dev namespace. So those kind of fine-grained controls you can achieve. Also, you can define the amount of resources available. So you can define quotas on namespaces. You can say that 10 GB of my RAM is always assigned to this namespace of dev. So any guy who wants to basically use more than 10 GB will not be able to use, right? You are putting a limit or a quota based on the namespace. Replica sets, I had discussed about this, right? That I want always like 5 copies of my application, right? So that can be done using replica sets. So if you see here, this specification again has a kind. The kind is replica set. So this is a new resource type in Kubernetes. So if you are having like say applications, right, which have multiple copies to be run, you would not create individual pods for them, right? Like I will not say kubectl create pod. Then if I want 5 copies of that, I will have to issue 5 separate commands for that, right? Instead of that, you can say I want to have a replica set which has 3 replicas. So when you say that you want 3 replicas, it will create 3 separate pods at the backend for you. And that's how you can basically uh, automate the number of replicas that you want to run, right? And you don't have to individually create and manage pods. This will be managed by the replica set itself. I will not go through all these details. I think it will be too much to cover in this session. Service is one concept I will just touch upon. So imagine that basically there are multiple copies of our application running in different nodes, right? And each application will have its own IP, correct? So if you want to access application running on this, you will have to specify the IP of this colon some port and then access this service, correct? If you want to access this application, you'll have to give this IP colon this port. So this is an overhead, right, for the end user. And these pods, right, can go down or can come back again at any point in time. So they are called as ephemeral pods. Ephemeral means they are transient in nature, and they are bound to crash at any point in time, right? So in distributed systems, it is always said that you should always assume that your applications will fail or will crash at any point in time. So this follows the same philosophy. So if these pods keep on going down and new pods keep on coming up, their IPs are going to change, right? So now an end user has to basically look up what is the IP of the new pod, and then access the pod with that IP. That is not feasible in production, right? For different types of users. So in that case, a concept of a service comes into picture. So what a service does is basically it sits on top of these applications or pods, and it acts like a load balancer basically. So when you say that, okay, I want to access an application called Nginx, right? So Nginx application might be running on uh, 3 different nodes with 3 different IPs. So a service basically when you create, right, it will know that, okay, for Nginx service to be accessed, I have 3 endpoints which are there running on these 3 nodes. So it registers this information along with itself. And when this request comes to access this endpoint, Nginx application, this guy will do a round robin or any other scheduling mechanism to route this call to one of these applications. Okay, so it is possible that when you say access Nginx for the first time, the service tries to route the call to this application and serve your request. The next time it might go to this. The next time it might go to this also. So that depends on how the service routing policy is implemented. That's where kubeproxy, that component, comes into picture. The kubeproxy looks at this service definition on the node right? And then it routes the call accordingly. So now with this, you are basically abstracted away from the concept of pods and IPs, right? You don't have to worry about what is the pod IP. You just have to give a service name, and based on the based on the DNS resolution and much other stuff, it will try to find out which endpoint to route to. So this is the concept of a service. And volumes, right? If you have applications which use storage, right? Database applications or any other applications that you wish to store your data into, right? How do you basically store data? For that, there is something called volumes. So in a pod, there can be two applications which are running as containers, and they want to basically uh, store data on the disk, uh, or they want to load the data from a disk, right? So basically they can load this disk into the container, which is something called mounting the disk inside the container. This is achieved using the mount namespace of Linux. And basically whatever you write into your mounted namespace, it is basically persisted onto the disk. So this is how you can basically store data for your application. So anything that you wish to store, any configuration or any actual data that you want to store on disk, right? That can be done using volumes. So to basically again abstract away the Kubernetes community came up with something called persistent volume claim. So what happens is, like, these volumes could be of different types, right? You could have a distributed NFS based storage file system. So there are different nodes having disks, right, which could be accessed via the network, right? And you want to now access the files on this storage, but you want to load them inside your pods in terms of volumes, right? So how do you do that? If you have NFS based file system or iSCSI based or any other protocol specific file system storage, right? Then you would have to write your logic to basically load that. But Kubernetes abstracts away this from you. You just have to tell that, okay, I want to claim some storage. Like, say I want to claim 10 GB of storage on an NFS based server, for example. So you will create this claim, like you're saying that I want to claim some storage. I want to claim some storage for storing my data, right? And you submit this YAML file with this specification, right? You create a claim and then you specify in your pod YAML that I want to basically use this claim. So you create a claim, then you create a pod YAML with a volume and say that I want to use this claim, and you give it to the Kubernetes cluster. The Kubernetes cluster will basically find out where this storage is residing on, and whether it is possible to bind or provide this storage to the end user. So on the system admin side, right, who is responsible, who knows, who understands network storage, right, he will create Kubernetes persistent volume resources, right, and basically these resources know how to talk to the network storage. So now the scheduler will see the claim of the user, see how much, what type of resource he wants, whether he was NFS based on any other type of resource, how much is the capacity that he wants. He will try to find out, he will look up the etcd, which is the storage, and he will see what are the different volumes that are available, persistent volumes that are available. These are published by the system admin, and then it will basically say that, okay, for your claim I found a volume which is matching your requirements, and this is the volume. So it will bind basically this volume to the claim. It means that, like, say this volume might have 100 GB of storage, but you are requesting only 10 GB. So the rest 90 GB will still be there for others to be claimed, right? So this is how you will basically achieve uh, how to use volumes basically. So you specify claims, and you say, and you want, and you load that, and you specify that in your volume you want to use a claim. The system admin creates that network storage, creates the persistent volume definition. So all this goes into the etcd, the configuration metadata, and the scheduler does the job of binding this. So now if you want to store any data, right, this will automatically handled by this layer. You don't have to write any protocol specific code. to store that data. You just have to put the data inside the container on your mounted namespace, right? And this persistent volume claim and the persistent volume, these together will make sure that your data is going into the network storage. So your data is actually being stored into the shared network storage, right? And it is being accessed via the container through these volumes. So I think we are about time, right?
Yeah, I think the best we could take some questions, and we
Yeah,
could also continue this over the next weekend.
yeah,
So like from where we have left it today, or because that seems to be very interesting, and this happens to be a very vast topic, right?
yeah.
So
So I'll just go through the chat and see
yep.
what are the
So
questions.
one common question what everybody has asked is, can you share the presentation? And I think Pankaj has shared the link to the presentation, right?
I am actually using existing SlideShare presentations from others. So I will share this link.
Yeah,
I will
okay.
share whatever links are there, and maybe
Yep.
that will be helpful because I found these slides very useful, so I just reused them.
Yes. Oh, okay, fine. So like whatever is great for
Yeah,
the team, that should be there.
I will share that. Yes.
Yep. So some questions there.
Pod has multiple containers. Yeah, a pod can have multiple containers. And yeah, as I said, these need not be necessarily Docker containers.
Mhm.
Docker is just a container runtime engine to manage containers. So there is a specification called CRI, Container Runtime Interface, which is now implemented by different runtimes. So Container D, Docker, and there are many other runtimes which you can plug into the Kubernetes. By default, I think Container D is used. So it has to basically adhere to the contract. The contract would be how do you manage the life cycle of containers, start, stop, create, delete, right? So those if you fulfill the contract, your container runtime can be plugged in and can be used. Yeah, I think Pankaj has shared that link. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. What are Helm charts? Yeah, I think these are separate topics we can
Topics itself.
cover.
Yep.
Yeah. In microservice architecture, will each API go into a pod or multiple APIs should go? What is the industry standard? Yeah, this is again like a design choice question. Like, how do you basically decouple your microservices? So ideally, if you look at what microservices are, like they say, right, in SOA terms, service-oriented
Mhm.
architecture, we should have loose coupling, and they should be independently be able to scale up and scale down, right? So
Yep.
ideally, each microservice should run in its own pod, right? And they should be reachable via gRPC, HTTP, or REST-based, or any other endpoint. Or if you are using message brokers for communication between microservices, Kafka or NATS or any other um, high performance PubSub system, people use a lot of these patterns. So there are basically I was like I wanted to cover these, like there are different container design patterns as well. So some of these patterns can help in developing microservices. Like there are different sidecar patterns, adapter
Uh-huh.
patterns. So yeah, this could not be covered today. I think
Yep.
we can cover these. I think there are we can have a kind of an agenda like where we can cover different topics. I think like
Yeah.
today we just covered overview. Then we
Yep. Yep.
can slowly go into in depth of Kubernetes and then talk about these design patterns also. So Kaustubh, I think we can have separate sessions for each of the like a series kind of thing we can make.
Sure. So let's, I mean, touch base after this call, and
Yeah,
then we could see like what should go into the next sessions,
yeah.
right? And then in that way we could decide. So we have one question from Anup, what is the difference between VNF and CNF? Right.
VNF and CNF.
Yeah. So.
I am actually not aware of like networking in depth.
Uh-huh.
So maybe someone who has,
Actually, yeah, I mean, he also makes a mention of that it could not be related to Kubernetes, but
yeah,
okay.
yeah. I think VNFs and CNF, these are like related to SDN, right? Networking kind of thing.
Yep.
Uh, virtual network functions and SDN control plane and controllers. Yeah, so I think that is a separate topic which I think should be covered in the networking sessions, right?
Networking sessions of, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So
like, if anyone has any expertise, right, they can come forward and they
mhm,
can basically try to volunteer and explain if they have any expertise in that area, like for example, networking or storage
mhm.
or any other area that they feel they have worked in. It is like better they can also share their experiences. It will
In
be
fact,
better.
Docker is also very vast, like to understand each of the
Yes,
contents,
yes.
what goes into Docker files and all. So that
Yeah,
would be a good starting point. So difference between pod and containers has been covered, I think.
yeah.
So okay, Purushottam has a question like how cloud and Kubernetes are related.
Yeah, cloud is actually like a whole ecosystem, right? Cloud will be basically it will cover your infrastructure, then it will cover basically your networking security, right? Your how do you want to manage your clusters? And Kubernetes basically is a layer at the it is just sits above the infrastructure layer. It is a platform as a service layer, right?
Yep.
So think of it like you have a cloud strategy that you want to migrate to, right? And you want to say utilize Kubernetes as a container platform.
Yeah.
So then there has to be a separate differentiation between what Kubernetes does and what other components in cloud does. So if you want to say use AWS for example
Mhm.
for hosting your applications, then the infrastructure capabilities like providing provisioning of EC2 instances or providing networking capabilities or load balancing capabilities or auto scaling of nodes, right? The hardware part, how do you manage your infrastructure can be handled by the infrastructure layer of AWS, right?
Mhm.
And the application deployment and containerization and automation and orchestration can be handled by Kubernetes, which can sit on top of the AWS, right? So it can be
Yes.
running as a separate control plane cluster within your AWS cluster in a VPC, and
Mhm.
then you can basically use Kubernetes for that. So Kubernetes purpose is just plain and simple. You give me a container and I will always keep it up and running. That's it.
Yep.
Other than that, it provides you ways to hook into different parts like networking, storage, scaling, right? It has
Mhm.
different plugins and extension mechanisms to do this, and these have to be like explored. What is the support that Kubernetes have, like for example with integrating with AWS or
Mhm.
for integrating with GCP. So AWS, GCP, Azure all have their hosted Kubernetes engines as well. Amazon has EKS.
Uh-huh.
Azure also has its own Kubernetes offering. So if you don't want to manage your cluster on your own and you want to delegate it to the cloud itself, right? You
Mhm.
can use that service as well. But that depends on the cost factor also and how much security you want for your data, right? You don't always want your data to be there on the cloud, right? You want some of your data to be there on premise, some of it to be
Exactly.
there on the cloud. So hybrid cloud models are also there.
Also there, yep.
Yeah.
And I think, in my opinion, like if you have all your applications in the data center, right, even then you can go for Kubernetes. So it's not
Mm.
something
Yes.
specific to the cloud.
Yeah, yeah. It can be
Right.
deployed on premise also.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be on cloud.
Okay. So that has answered one question. And then what do we have next? Okay. So a lot of questions on documentation. I think the links have been shared. Is container associated with host OS? I think, yeah. So is container host associated with host OS?
Yeah, container basically the container runtime, right? It is responsible for so container is nothing but a process, right? It runs on
Yep.
the host operating system only. The only thing is it is the management of the container that basically the process which runs with the PID, right? That is managed by the container runtime using these C groups and namespaces. So it is nothing different, right? So it is just a Linux process, but it is basically using the power of C groups and namespaces, you can uh, call it as a container. So it is not something different. It is the Linux process itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
there are container runtimes which allow you to basically manage these containers. So that's what uh, Linux processes with additional software isolation gives you containers.
Okay, so we have a question from Pankaj, like, can we set up a Kubernetes in your local machine and what are the system requirements?
Yeah, so Kubernetes, like there is a Minikube which comes, right?
Yep.
Minikube is there. There are many tools which come together. Like I have one running using this Docker desktop, basically. So on
Mhm.
Docker desktop, you can have Kubernetes running. So I
Okay.
wanted to have this demo actually, but we ran out of time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there are
So.
like demo
Uh-huh.
sessions as well, which are there on like sites like Katacoda and all. You can
Mhm.
play around with these also.
So we will include the demo sessions also down the line,
Yeah,
right? Let's cover the theoretical aspect, or let's have a blend of the theory and
yeah, yeah.
the demo session, right? So we
Yes.
have a question from Avinash. So number of pods available आणि sidecars वाढले तर performance वर काय परिणाम होणार? Okay, so like how many pods you have, and if we increase the sidecars, right? So will it
Hmm.
impact the performance?
Yeah, it depends on like how much are your latency requirements. Like if like sidecar container is basically uh, is a container sitting along with your main application, right? Like say
Yep.
if your application is producing some logs and you want these logs to be sent to some central storage, like say to cloud in a structured format, right? Then
Mhm.
you would want to have, instead of your application itself doing the conversion to a structured format and sending to cloud, you can push it to a volume, and then your sidecar can pull that and push and basically do the restructuring and send it to the
Uh-huh.
cloud. So there is a component called Fluent D, right? Fluent D is a open source project which is
Mhm.
responsible, which does this log restructuring and sending to cloud. So if you are having these two containers, and in case of that, your sidecar does the job of pushing these logs. So ideally your application, the main application, is relieved of this logic, right? So
Yes.
your application can focus on the business logic, the core logic, and in that way it depends on how much is your uh, latency requirements or throughput requirements. It is
Makes
like
sense.
not a straightforward thing to say, I think.
Yes.
But ideally, if you use sidecars, you will be achieving higher throughput and lower latency on your main application, because you are offloading your main application from doing that heavy lifting, right? Which is
Yep.
not necessary for it to do.
Makes sense. So Pratik has a question, like he says kube admin to deploy kube cluster. So can we use kube admin
Yeah.
to deploy? Yep. Okay.
CubeADM
Okay.
is, I think, a very mature tool now, and that
Uh-huh.
can also be used
Used to
to create the cluster.
okay. So if one container, so this is from Saurabh, if one container has a Spring Boot application running and one has an Angular app,
Yeah.
so both in single or two different nodes. So will the REST request route through API server? Okay. I
Yeah,
mean,
this
yep.
doesn't have to go through the API server. As I said, right, there are container networking technologies, right? Overlay networks. So your packet has to go via the overlay network, not through the API server. So
Okay.
whatever communication from the control plane to the kubelet, that only goes through the API server, right?
Uh-huh.
So
Okay. So.
your basically how your overlay network is set up. Based on
Mhm.
that, your packets will go from your Spring Boot app to the other Angular app. It can be on single node or it could be on different nodes. If it is on single node, you don't have to go via the overlay network. It will go via the local host itself. So it will use the host network namespace itself to talk. But if it is on two different nodes, there will be a latency involved, because you are doing a remote RPC call, right? And
Mhm.
the packets are going across the network to a separate node.
Makes sense. So
Yeah.
Pratik has another question, like, is it possible to provide a dedicated access for a person to use a specific image and not all to build a container from your own Docker repository?
Yeah, I think these kind of permissions are possible, but they are not part of this. Like Kubernetes doesn't provide you these kind of things. Right?
This is
It is
okay.
setting up maybe Docker Hub, uh, configuring the Docker Hub in the repository, right?
Uh-huh.
These kind of access control mechanisms can be provided at that level.
Okay. So any more questions, or have we
I
covered
think,
everything?
yeah, I wanted to cover the demo session today itself,
Yep.
but
Yep.
I think we ran out of time. I wanted to show um, some, some things using this Katacoda. It would have
Uh-huh.
given some, at least some helpful insight into the theory that we
Mhm.
talked about. Yeah.
Yep, right. So, like, if we have everything leveraged on AWS, right?
Mm,
So there we could be in a dilemma to go for Fargate or for
mm,
Kubernetes. Uh,
mm.
right? So that was one
Yeah. So yeah, those are all depending on like
depending on,
how
yeah.
much is the cost involved, what kind of latencies are involved and all. So
Mhm,
many times we don't use uh, cloud provided services like EKS and all.
mhm.
Maybe we want to store the data on our own cluster instead of putting it into EKS instances, right? Which so those
Okay.
choices are yeah there.
Makes sense.
Mm.
Okay, so I think we have covered all of the questions, and I see there's a very common concern, like there should be a demo. So I'll
Yeah.
just I have a disclaimer here because we just plan to have an introductory session. So down the
Yeah.
line, looking at your tremendous response and your participations and all, so we could extend this as a series, and we will make a note that we would also have the demo sessions here,
Yes.
right? So this could be taken in the further sessions. So I mean, just feel free to reach out if you guys have any concerns, like through WhatsApp, or most of you are part of the BM community, right? So maybe just ping us and let us know like what else could be done, and what are some of the upcoming sessions that you guys are looking for, right? Like, okay, we have got a Kubernetes down the line, so there could be, you guys could be experts into RPA or UiPath or something like that, right? So we could
Mm.
even I'll just send out a message on the same thing, right? And anyways, thanks for your participation.
Yeah.
So Rohit,
Thank you,
this was
everyone.
yep, yeah,
Yeah.
this was a very helpful session, because this is a very hot topic and a lot
Yeah.
of us are under very misconceptions about what Kubernetes is, and like how
Mm.
it could have. So
Yeah.
thanks Rohit for your time. I mean, we have been planning this since long, but we could not we could
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
get together,
Yeah.
right?
Sure.
Anyways, yep. Yeah, thanks. So guys, feel free to reach out, let us know in case of any concerns, and any suggestions, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you,
Thanks.
everyone.
Thanks all. Yeah. Yep.